A very elusive cousin to LSD, Methylisopropyllysergamide, MiPLA, was originally synthesized by Albert Hofmann, but never ended up becoming as popular among psychedelic users. I had still heard amazing things about it on occasion, including a quote by Analogue describing it as better than the Great Lucy. In 2019, 10,000 tabs were produced for a very limited release, and I was lucky enough to acquire a few. They arrived on plain white blotter paper, advertised at 200 micrograms each. At the time, I had a demanding schedule and was under a lot of stress, so I gave a couple tabs to some good friends, and put the rest aside for later. I forgot about them for some time. About a year later, I had a rare day off and was in a good mood. I wanted to trip, but not too heavily. Mushrooms were out. I also wanted it to be with a substance that wouldn't last too long, excluding LSD and mescaline as well. Suddenly, I remembered the MiPLA tucked away in a safe spot on my bookshelf, and decided it was time to try it. Trip reports were very limited for this rare drug. Although most of them suggested it had a very light headspace and lacked the potency of LSD, some people experienced negative effects such as heavy vasoconstriction. I decided to be cautious and take just half a tab this time. At about 2 to 3 times weaker than LSD, I expected some threshold psychedelic effects at most. Around 11 a.m., I cut a tab in half and placed it under my tongue. After 10 minutes, I swallowed it for good measure and laid in bed to read a book. About 20 minutes later, I realized that I was having trouble focusing and not remembering what I was reading. I also felt a little restless, so I put on music and got out of bed. It felt unusually good to stretch, and I was experiencing tingly sensations all over. I had a little nausea, but it wasn't too bad compared to most psychedelics. Despite lacking an appetite, I ate an apple and drank some water. Around an hour later, 12:30, I was unmistakably tripping. The headspace was light, but I was definitely not sober. I watched a couple funny short videos and laughed until it hurt, then switched back to music. LSD is probably my favorite drug for music enhancement, and the effects of MiPLA were very similar. But unlike LSD, which usually makes me content to lie in one place for hours with headphones on, I had the urge to dance. Combined with the very sensual body high, it almost felt like I was rolling on MDMA. Looking in the mirror, my eyes were somewhat dilated, but it wouldn't have been noticeable to anyone else. I danced in my living room for a while, happy that I was tripping alone and had no need to be self-conscious about it. It felt like about an hour had passed, but I was shocked to see that it had actually been about 20 minutes since I last checked. Despite not tripping so hard, the time dilation was significant. There were no notable open eye visuals, but some light audio-visual synesthesia with my eyes closed. At around 1 p.m., 2 hours after taking it, I decided to lie down again. I turned out all the lights in my bedroom except for a Himalayan salt lamp, took off most of my clothes, and wrapped myself in a fleece blanket. Despite not actually doing anything sexual, the soft texture of the blanket against my skin felt like a synesthetic full-body orgasm accompanied by pastel streaks of color in my visual field. I briefly cried because everything felt so good, even better than on MDMA. This was extremely unusual for an LSD analog, as most lysergamides tend to make me feel physically desensitized or numb. While I was relieved to be tripping alone and completely unconcerned with what anyone else would have thought, I was also curious about how good it would be to take this drug with a partner and actually have sex while under the influence of it. I listened to music for about another half hour while wrapped in the blanket, then decided to take a shower with the bathroom lights out, one of my favorite activities on other psychedelics. It was very enjoyable, although not quite as good as the previous hour had been. With the short duration, I suspected the drug was already starting to wear off. My appetite was starting to come back, another clear sign that I was already coming down. After my shower, I decided to walk to a nearby store to get some snacks. On the way there, I realized that my thoughts were still kind of silly and not the kind of things that would occur to me sober. When nobody was looking, I walked through a patch of grass and briefly took my shoes off. Dragging my feet across the grass felt amazing. I decided to take a full tab in the future and spend some time at the park. By the time I got back home with something to eat, I was already feeling back to baseline. I'd estimate that I got around 2 to 3 hours of actual tripping time out of it, with only an hour being significantly psychedelic. The afterglow was nice and lasted for the rest of the day, and I had no trouble falling asleep that night. I feel very fortunate to have had the experience to try a drug that very few people on the planet have taken, and look forward to enjoying my few remaining tabs in the future.